I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. So it's December, and it's the holiday gift-giving season again. And if you're like me, and you have a bunch of horror movie collectors on your list, getting something that scratches that itch can be hard to do. Now, what is that itch? Well, collecting is an odd sport. There's two sides really to it. We live to see something that we haven't seen before. But it's not just the receiving that matters. We live to give someone else something that they've never seen, especially if it's something that we just grabbed for ourselves. Collecting's a lot like joke telling. It's fun to hear a great joke, but it's not enough to just sit there with the damn joke. You need to tell the joke to someone else before the circuit is complete. So the big challenge every year is, where do I find that rare gift, the story or the movie I haven't seen and that I can give to others? Well, that's a big question. And you know what? I have a guest who's going to help us get to the bottom of that. Roxanne Guarino is a writer and actress from Central New Jersey. Since 2018, she has been a regular writer and performer on Cinema Insomnia with Mr. Lobo, playing everyone from Scooby-Doo's Daphne to Anya Ormsby from Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. You know, that's a really common one. Her writing has appeared in publications such as Music Men Ruin For Me and Rhizopop, and her upcoming novel, The Harrowing, was semifinalist on the TV pilot America's Next Great Author. Roxanne is also the author of a zine about lost and obscure films, which we're going to discuss today, and I have a copy right here. The Craziest Movies You NeverSaw. And she's also Miss Blobfest of 2021. You know what? That's an honor that is so big, only one person per year ever gets to have it. So, Roxanne Guarino, welcome to the show.
Scott, thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's get right to it. I have a question I usually ask people. Actually, it's turning into a 5-part question. And it seems like the perfect thing to do as of right now, which is I start with one, which is, what was your first kiss with horror? Then the second part of this question is, how old were you? Third question is, who was your corruptor? Fourth question is, how did it make you feel? Was it a good experience, a bad experience? And then number 5 is, what was your jumping off point? What was the moment when you decided you were going to be yourself completely, that geek, that nerd, that completist, whatever it is, where you said, forget it, I'm not going to my prom, I'm going to go watch Conan the Barbarian in the theater instead?
I mean, that sounds way more fun than my prom, I got to tell you. But, Arnold wasn't at my prom. But that is, I love the way you put that. It's very writerly. What was your first kiss of horror? I like that. I had a lot of kind of brushes with the horror genre when I was very young. I got scared very easily when I was a child.
Same here.
Yeah, I think it's weird. I think a lot of people who get really into horror later in life, they're like that. It's like, my mom never let me have candy when I was a kid, and now I eat way too much candy and I ruined all my teeth, that kind of a thing. But let me get to the point here. I want to say my first kiss of horror is when I was in the Girl Scouts. I was a Daisy Girl Scout, and we were on a field trip to the local library, which is awesome. And we were on a field trip to the local library, which is very close to my house and my school. And we were allowed to go. We had a whole room that was just children's books. And, we were allowed to go through the room and, look at whatever we wanted. And, and I found this book, which I forget the exact title of it, but it's called like The Story of Vampires, or The History of Vampires, and it had all these photos from old vampire movies in it. And then they were talking about vampire lore. They were talking a lot about the Bram Stoker Dracula novel, and they were talking about Varney the Vampire and Vlad the Impaler and all that stuff. And just a lot for a 5-year-old, but like they just couldn't tear me away from that book the whole time. So I guess that was my first kiss. And the local library when I was growing up, I guess, would be my corruptor, because, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
I thought it might have been the Girl Scouts for a moment there.
Oh my gosh. No, our I wish our troop had been more fun. Our troop was kind of lame. Our troop leader was a little bit of a buzzkill.
So was it very addictive? Was that the feeling that you got off of the first kiss?
Yeah, the floodgates kind of opened from there because my school library had a few books like that. So then I went and read all of those. And then I was still a little too scared to watch the movies, but the books were like kind of like my gateway drug, if you will, because then I would kind of know what was coming. So like then, then I started wanting to read the stories they talked about, like Dracula and Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I also really loved the Addams Family and the Munsters when I was a kid.
Uh-huh.
And this show, Big Bad Beetleborgs. You ever hear of that one?
Big Bad Beetleborgs?
Yeah,
No.
Beetleborgs. Yeah, I guess Star Trek couldn't sue them for the rights to the word Borg because that's not a real word. But it was like a combination of Power Rangers and Scooby Doo. It was like
Mm.
one of those Super Sentai type shows where there's fighting stuff, and we took it from a Japanese series and we shot the kids out of the costumes. But the kids, like their home base when they were superheroes was a haunted house. So they're literally hanging out with a mummy, a werewolf, Frankenstein, and a vampire when they're not, saving the neighborhood from evil. And, just that kind of stuff really fueled my imagination. So, like, by the time I was 14, I was watching horror movies and really getting into them. Also, yeah, just kind of learning about retro things. You pick
Yeah.
up on a lot of retro horror themed stuff like Mad Monster Party and Addams
Hmm.
Family and the Munsters. And I've always kind of been fascinated by, retro things, stuff my parents grew up with, because it seems like the world is such a different place than, when you're growing up. Yeah, by the time I was 14, I was pretty hooked. There was no going back. I think the first horror movie I was ever really a hardcore fan of was probably Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow.
That's a fun one. And
Yeah.
a lot of heads in that movie. That's for
Oh
sure.
boy, yeah.
So that leaves the one thing, the jumping off point. When did Roxanne decide, screw it, I'm just going to be this person and do this and make it public?
I think it was definitely around the time when I was 14. I wasn't super popular, but I had some friends who were about as quirky as me. And it was just like, screw it. I'm going to be who I really am. Yeah, I decided, you know what? I can't really, I'm just really into a lot of weird stuff, and that's what makes me happy. So I'm gonna go all in on that because my friends seem to get it, even if a lot of the other people my age I know don't get it. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm having fun. I'm not going to let that stop me. So,
Now, how does one get to be someone who is so obsessed that you become a collector, but not only just a collector, you have a magazine now devoted to things you're pretty positive people haven't seen.
okay, no, thank you. I'm very glad you asked that. So, everybody loves things that are obscure or hidden or shocking in some way. I'm sure you've seen a lot of that with your friends, and you use stat and you watch those really bad movies and people were really into that. Okay, first of all, I love obscure movies. I love bad movies. I love movies that are really hard to come by. There's a lot of overlaps. There's a big Venn diagram if we had a Venn diagram. But I noticed that a lot of the time when people talk about cult movies or movie or obscure movies, I should say, or really bad movies, a lot of people were bringing up the same things over and over again. So that was why I decided to talk about this. And I said, okay, I think all of these really have a hook that I can use to kind of get people's attention. Like, hey, did you hear about the time Hanna-Barbera tried to make their own version of Fantasia and it was for adults and it was super controversial? You have a pitch like that, people immediately want to know more. I wanted to maybe highlight some of the unsung heroes, and the lost media community is really a fascinating place. And, without them, I wouldn't have been able to do this. I relied on so much information that they had found, and they have so many wonderful resources out there. It was just up to me to take the work that they had done and I'm a writer. I like to discuss things in kind of a humorous way and kind of make the audience excited and engaged. And it was my job to really pitch it was my job to pitch them, and it was my job to work on my drawing skills while I did that, because I always wanted to be a cartoonist, so I kind of jumped on that opportunity.
So how does one? What is it about research that is so exciting? I think one of the things that you just mentioned that I wanted to hit on was that there's a lost media community. Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yes, I can. It's a very exciting place. The Lost Media Wiki was the primary source that I used in compiling all this information. They have all their citations there, and where I had to cite other sources I've noted. Lost media searches on the internet tend to come about when people have a half remembered thing from their childhood. Like, what was that anti-smoking commercial where someone was coughing up and you saw their lung and it was really gross and disgusting? Because I can't find it, because people don't tape commercials. People don't necessarily know. What was the movie I saw in Mrs. Johnson's health class in 5th grade? Well, if you can't easily access those things, you can't go up on Netflix and pull those up, and you could Google it if you knew the name of it, but you don't. So people, they go on Reddit, they go on TV Tropes, they go on the Lost Media Wiki, they go on I think back when answers.com was around, and internet forums. When internet forums were at their peak, they were full of this stuff. And you can still go on the few that are still active, and there'll be all kinds of requests on there, like on the website Tough Pigs. That's a Muppet fan site. There are dozens of pages where people talk about, what was that Sesame Street sketch that really scared me? Was this real, or was it something I made up? So a lot of lost media searches begin that way. And in fact, that was how my own personal fascination with lost media started, if you want to know more about that.
Yeah, the missing persons unit of movies. So talk a little bit about what was your first thing that got you to where it wasn't enough to just, maybe find out a little bit. You needed to get an answer and you dug down.
Okay, this is great because this really dovetails with the whole horror thing, because this was something that really scared me as a child. So, like a lot of children who grew up in the 90s, I loved watching Nickelodeon when I was a kid. And they did this program that I'm absolutely fascinated with, and I did a lot of research on. Maybe I'll make a zine about this one day, because I had to do some research on my own. It was called Short Films by Short People, and what the company actually used to do is they would send representatives from Nickelodeon out to different schools across the country, and they would ask kids to make up stories, and then they'd make them into a short film using the channels, directors, camera operators, sets. To me, that's so cool. I mean, kids can do this now on TikTok or whatever, but it's not often that, no, the corporation is going to come to you and they're going to do this. And the thing about these shorts is they didn't have credits. They would have maybe like a little snippet at the end where the kid who came up with the story would talk about, this is my movie and Nickelodeon made it. So they didn't have credits, and they would show them in between the shows because it was like a little 4-minute thing to fill up the dead air. They used to have a lot of short subjects on Nickelodeon. I don't watch Nickelodeon anymore. I don't think they do that anymore, but they used to have a lot of really fascinating and interesting short subjects that would air on there in between shows. You wouldn't know what was going to come on. So if you really liked one or you were really scared of one, it would totally be like this anticipatory waiting game. Okay, Inspector Gadget's over. Oh man, are they going to show that cartoon with the alien? That one's really scary. Oh, or maybe they'll show the one with the castle. Oh, it's a really good one. Oh, I hope they show that one. Oh, it's an alien! Duck behind the couch. So there'd be like that little waiting game. So this was part of Short Films by Short People, my personal nightmare. It was called Attack of the Giant Vulture. And This was made this was shot, I believe, on location in New York City's Chinatown, and it was three girls from a school in that area, and this is the story that they wrote, where they're attacked by a grotesque vulture puppet who seems intent on eating them. So they turn the tables on him with some hilarious Richard Lester style stop motion slapstick, and then they kill and eat him. That's the end of the film. As a kid, I was horrified. The vulture was someone in a full body puppet like Big Bird.
All
Uh,
right.
and it kind of looked like the puppet from that movie, The Giant Claw. I'm sure your
Oh my
listeners,
God. Oh yeah. We know the giant
your
claw.
listeners will be familiar with that one. It looked like Big Bird's mother had a torrid affair with the puppet from The Giant Claw. And let me tell you, this, I'm not the only person that was looking for this, but for years, I mean, I think the last time I saw it, it was on Noggin, the sister channel to Nickelodeon, and I was about 11. And then after that, I never saw it again. And I would, people on YouTube were looking for this short for a long time. I remember they started looking when I was in college, and there was just no trace of this thing. So I'd go on YouTube trying to find it. It would never be there. Sometimes people would upload like a fake video, and the video was blank. And, and you didn't even get rolled. That was the worst part, but
How did it feel when you found it?
oh my God. At first, so yeah, there's an interesting story there. So I'm looking around, and there are other people looking for this, and I'm reading their testimonials on whatever, like, what was that thing with the weird puppet? And then I found that the Paley Center in New York City, which is not that far from where I live, had a copy of this thing. It was on a tape with the other films from that initiative that they had, Short Films by Short People. And I had a good friend in college at that time who was just into this kind of stuff. I got him to go. I told him about like my quest because we had started, we had heard about another Nickelodeon Lost Media search, which was for Cry Baby Lane. Maybe I'll get into that at some point. And I said, do you want to go see this with me? And he said, yes. So of course I had butterflies because I was going with the guy I had a crush on to see this thing, but I also had butterflies. Like, what if it's still really scary? That would be so embarrassing. And then I was thinking, like, what if it's not scary? What if I'm really let down? And then, like, I traveled a whole hour from school to go to the city, like, for nothing. But, like, in some ways, it was, kind of like this exciting quest I was going on, because when I was a kid, I always wanted to be somebody like Lara Croft or like Indiana Jones. Yeah, hey, I'm non-binary, same difference. But I wanted to be somebody like Lara Croft and Indiana Jones, and like I found this thing that no one else has found, and so I was kind of approaching it with that mentality, and that kind of helped me manage any other anxiety I had about the situation for whatever reason. So we got there, we watched it, and I was shocked that I had ever been scared of it, but it was exactly as I remembered it. It was exactly as I remembered it. I remembered it with a lot of clarity, and that felt satisfying to me because I wasn't gaslighting myself. I wasn't exaggerating it in my memory, like,
All right, Indiana Croft. That works well. See, I think there's something there, though. That's what I have found when I've had quests that I've waited for a long time. When I see them, there's like this breath of like relief that comes across me when I'm seeing these. I'm remembering. I know we had talked about this earlier. There was a movie that I had only heard about because I was a snoop. And it was my aunt had gone to see this movie. So I was in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. And for some reason, we were one of those places that movies that needed to just fill out some kind of obligation, that the studio needed to have an obligation of opening in certain areas or certain amounts of theaters. They would drop these movies on us. And so one of the movies was, I found out later, Last House on Dead End Street. which I think when it was playing at the drive-in, think of this movie playing in the drive-in. This is a really disturbing movie to have at 80 feet by 30 feet or whatever the drive-in screen size was. It played under the name The Funhouse. And my aunt went to see it. And I was listening to her in the other room. She's going, oh, my God, there was this scene. We nearly threw up. They had this woman tied to a table, and they started sawing her leg off, and she passed out. And as she passed out, they took smelling salts, and they put them under her nose, and she woke up, and they started sawing again. And I was like, oh, my God, I got to see this. It repulsed me. And yet I was like, I can't believe this is actually happening. So, of course, I didn't see it then. But that was such a white hot memory that it was inferred upon me that by the time I got to be an adult, I started trying to find this movie without a name. And I would bring it up and people were like, oh my God, I think I know. So at a certain point, nobody's saying absolutely, I know what movie that is. And if that had happened, then the quest would have been over. Maybe it wouldn't have been as exciting, but it was almost like it was heading into urban legend territory. Like, did this movie even exist? Is this something that people made up? And then it took until the early 2000s, found out one of the main reasons. I had heard that the name was Last House on Dead End Street, because once the internet actually started to chug itself into existence, you do these searches. And at first, nothing on Last House on Dead End Street. And then all of a sudden, there were just these one or two little things, usually BBs, bulletin boards, people asking about it. And so I'd be like going, oh my God, it must be real. So I knew the name and I knew that this thing existed, but no one was sure what it was because every name that was on the titles and any of the posters in the beginning of the movie were all pseudonyms. So there was a thought that it was an actual snuff film. There was thought that it was foreign because the voices did not match the mouths of the people who were speaking. Actually, it's because they did not have sync sound and they just
like Manos, the Hands of Fate.
Exactly. Yeah. So they just had a 16 millimeter camera without sound and no Nagra, and then they just put it in later. And so it had this huge reputation. And then in the early 2000s, they found out the director's girlfriend happened to be on one of these BBs, and she said, Roger Watkins. Yeah, it sounds like they're talking about your movie. And he goes on and he says, yes, I'm the guy who directed this. It wasn't a guy named Victor Janos. It was me. And now I'm ready to take responsibility for it. So they finally came out with a good, pristine version of it. And it was on Barrel DVD. And I got it. And there was this moment when I saw that scene that it had so much more heft than had I just stumbled upon the movie. And there's something about the weight of anticipation, the weight of reputation, and just the amount of time it takes to search that when you finally see that moment, it takes on almost like this religious aspect to it.
I know exactly what you're saying. That was an awesome story, by the way. That was an awesome story. Like, eventually, Attack of the Giant Vulture was uploaded to YouTube by Nickelodeon, so everyone saw it. But, it'll always mean more to me because I made that special journey to go and see it.
Yeah.
And I was also, my friend Adam and I, we were at the first public screening of one of the most sought after pieces of lost media of all time, which was the Sesame Street episode that Margaret Hamilton guest starred on in the 70s as the Wicked Witch. Oh, did you hear about this, Scott?
Oh, I've seen this. So how is it? I did not realize that it was that lost because she dresses in the green and then she's not. She's dressed normally, right?
Yeah, Scott, this is a serious rabbit hole in the lost media community because people were on the message boards I talked about, like the Muppet one. Everybody, like, there were so many people in there asking about that episode. And this was a nationwide search. This was the holy grail of lost media for quite some time, up until last year, I believe. But
that's so funny because I've seen this.
Nuts.
And it may be that and that's what happens, right? Yeah, it takes one guy to beat the 4-minute mile, and then everybody's breaking it. So somebody found this, and now it's been on the internet a bunch of times because I've seen this because she's so sweet. And it's because she scared so many kids as the Wicked Witch. So they had her come on as herself.
Yeah, it was fascinating. And yeah, my friend Adam, hi Adam, and I were at the first public screening of that at Museum of the Moving Image in New York. There was something called Sesame Street Lost and Found.
Wow.
And there had just been, I believe it was Christmas 2017. I remember this because I was rehearsing for a play, and like my friend texted me, he said they found it was Christmas 2016. They found Crackmaster, which was another Sesame, like a long lost piece of Sesame Street lore. They found Crackmaster, and they were showing Crackmaster, which was this lost Sesame Street cartoon, at the Museum of the Moving Image, where they have a permanent Jim Henson exhibit, which makes sense because they used to shoot the show around there in Queens. I think they shoot it somewhere else now, but they were showing that, and they said they were showing other lost treasures. So I said to my friend, I think they're going to show Margaret Hamilton, because a lot of people were saying to CTW, like, release this footage, because they said a lot of parents complained, and that's why they just stopped showing that episode, and they've never alluded to it, which is strange because she is certainly one of Hollywood's most iconic actresses, reprising her most iconic role.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, and she even did it on Mr. Rogers, but explaining to kids that, I'm just a lady wearing a costume. You don't have to be afraid. But on Sesame Street, she's in character the whole time, and then disguises herself as a normal old lady. And she really, as you said, she really is quite sweet. And I remember they showed that in the museum, in the movie theater there. People went crazy. And people kept saying, do not film this. We had to get special permission to show it. Do not film this. And I said to my friend, there are people pulling out their phones right now, aren't there? But anyway, go on.
I did want to go back to something that you said, which is this group of people that's out there.
It's the Lost Media Wiki, lostmediawiki.com.
Yeah,
super easy.
Yeah, Lost Media Wiki. So you had mentioned how it was like, oh, I remember seeing this thing when I was in school, in elementary school, and I have not been able to think about it. I've got 2 of these things that have been haunting me.
I wonder if I know what they are. Maybe you can tell me.
Here we go. Let's just give it a shot. So one of them was a marionette type thing where tooth decay were these really weird guys on a big set of teeth. And of course, at first, the kid's doing all the right things and his teeth are good, but these guys are going, ah, and you see them digging into the teeth and everything. And they're standing on drills, and the kid starts going, oh, and they're like, give them more candy. So you see all this candy coming in and everything. And this is marionettes, right? On a big stage. And the tongue is like going back and forth. And the kid starts crying as they're drilling. Ha ha. And it ends with and I think this is why to this time in my life, I still have kind of a gag reflex to someone brushing their teeth and like the foam coming out of their mouth. It's just, for some reason, that's, of all the things I watch, all the disgusting things that I've seen in my life, the thing that still makes me gag is somebody brushing their teeth in front of me and the stuff coming out of their mouth, the foam coming out of their mouth. So in this, a giant toothbrush comes to wash these guys away. And it's like the foam is going everywhere and like going, So you see this huge toothbrush taking these marionette guys and splashing them off of the teeth. And then you see them going down the drain with all this fucking toothpaste foam. And that was one of the movies that I can't find for the life of me. I'm assuming it was made in the early 60s, late 50s, because I was in elementary school in the early 70s. And when I saw that, they used to show it every year. So from 1 through 6, I guess, at E.A. Enke Elementary School in West Hazelton, Pennsylvania, they used to put this thing on with a couple other shorts. And what was funny is that they did have this stable of these movies, these little shorts that they would do. to get us to brush our teeth and do all this stuff. And the year after Jaws, so 1976, we'll say. So at that point, I'm 10 years old. So I'm what, fourth grade, something like that. I'm not even sure. They added blood to these things. So, everybody knows Red Asphalt and all of that, the movies that are the driver's ed things that were highly gory. Well, they decided.
Oh, the kids in the monkey masks. That one. One got fat. That's another one. That
kind of thing. Yeah, where they had all. So in the year after, I remember up until Jaws, everything was just kind of like that surreal stuff with the marionettes and the drill and the toothpaste foam and all this grotesquerie. And then all of a sudden they added blood to it. So it was this thing of don't make a lot of noise and be rowdy on school buses, or you might crash in slow motion and blood will squirt everywhere. So there was this thing. All I remember out of it is that there are 2 bus crashes in this thing. So they have one kid is like throwing up in the back of the bus. And it starts getting everybody looking over. Hey, I think something's wrong with the kid. And it distracts the bus driver, who then goes, oh no, off the road. And they show the kids slowly rolling, and they just throw fake blood on the kids, and they're rolling around. And one of the kids I think in the second bus crash, he's on the bus and he's the bad kid, and he has a knife, right? And he's got a lock blade knife, and like going, you shouldn't have that. You shouldn't have that. He goes, what's it to you? And then they crash, and he's there, and he's cut himself with his knife, and he's bleeding, and somebody else gets cut by the knife as he's holding it up, like going, ugh, while he's spinning around.
It needs to get your knife out on the bus.
Exactly. And then I think it ends up in the water. So like the end of the thing shows this bus being pulled out of the water. But I've never been able to find that. I became obsessed in trying to find that particular one, because I knew Red Asphalt and stuff like that, where they allegedly show real accident footage and stuff to scare kids straight. But this one was just astonishingly haunting to me. It kind of blew me away. So we've talked a lot on the peripheries of what we've been speaking about. Let's just dive right in. So in the first zine that I got off of you, you have a movie. I want you to describe it a little bit. It is a 1987 film. It's an animated feature. It's by one of America's favorite studios, Hanna-Barbera Studios. Anybody who knows anything, Charlotte's Web. For God's sake, they went into cinema.
Classic.
Charlotte's Web came out of them. We've, of course, got Yogi Bear, and you've got Fred Flintstone, the Flintstones, all coming from Hanna-Barbera. Was it the Jetsons? The Jetsons. Yeah, Jetsons were from Hanna-Barbera. So highly respectable, reasonably, low budget, and yet very much beloved. People like the kind of thing that they did. And they made a movie that essentially self-banned itself. Has, as of yet, I don't think it has ever been publicly released, correct?
That is correct. This is kind of like Hanna-Barbera's weird redheaded stepchild they don't want to talk about, while Scooby-Doo is the golden child. Scooby-Doo is your kid that, he went to Harvard and now he's a doctor. Except, the recent Scooby-Doo movie got canceled, so maybe that's a bad example. But this is Rock Odyssey. Rock Odyssey is the Hanna-Barbera movie they don't want you to know about. And while it is available on the internet, I felt it was my duty to make people aware of it, because this is just a really fascinating experimental kind of piece that they did. And Hanna-Barbera, their stuff is, I loved Hanna-Barbera when I was a kid. And their stuff is very wholesome. Like you were saying, it's very nice. It's maybe a little corny, but it's not edgy. It's not going to upset anyone for any reason. But, it's the 80s, the company's at a turning point. This is the 80s. They're going to do something really big and different and daring. And they had been kind of putting their toe in the feature film water, because Flintstones had movies, Yogi Bear had a movie, and like you said, Charlotte's Web, we watched that in first grade. Let me tell you, that is an A+ classic. They also did a movie of Heidi in the 80s, Heidi's Song. It's a weird movie. It's a weird movie.
Yeah, that was the failure.
It was pretty much a failure, which is sad, because if you watch the movie, the animation's really nice. But if you've ever seen any other version of Heidi, you're going to go, this is really strange. And like those of you who have never seen Heidi will be kind of lost. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's get to Rock Odyssey. So they say, okay, it's the 80s. What do kids like? They like MTV and they like weird movies like that heavy metal movie. Let's make something like that. And I think Hanna-Barbera saw this as their answer to Fantasia. Like there's going to be music and the animation is going to tell the story of that music. It sounds a lot like Fantasia, but Fantasia didn't try to do the whole history of classical music in one movie. Rock Odyssey tried to do the entire history of rock and roll in one film, which to me is impossible.
And not only that, who should be taking it on? Why not Hanna-Barbera? I mean, how old were they in 1966 when the Flintstones came out? And they're going to talk about rock and roll, right?
But it's like Hanna-Barbera was always 2 decades behind everything. Like Heidi's song, that was what, 1982? Kids in 1982, they wanted something like Tron or The Empire Strikes Back. They didn't want Heidi's song. They're always 2 decades behind. And now they're, that would be a tall order for any film.
Oh my God, yeah. And it's just such a weird thing. I know that this was worked on for quite a while, Rock Odyssey. It was supposed to air on ABC like in 1982. And it was canceled out beforehand because people finally got to see some of the footage. And you got very nervous around some of it. I just watched, before we got on, I decided I was going to try and find some pieces to it. So I found the I'm a Woman sequence, which essentially starts with this woman on a life raft, that is, out in the ocean with the HMS Titanic thing on it, and a drunk seagull drinking out of like a Cutty Sark bottle or something, and then giving her some of it. And I don't know what happens to her, but in the background is an obvious ripoff of just the lilt from Summer Breeze Makes Me Feel Fine. That is playing in the background. And then they just decide, oh, no, we're not going to rip anything off subtly. We're going to overtly do it. And it goes right into I'm a Woman. And then there's like this, I don't know. I guess you could say it was like a Folie Bergère or whatever it was.
They're being saucy.
Yeah, a little bit
being
saucy.
They're a little saucy. We're not at Ralph Bakshi or heavy metal levels of saucy, but they're definitely like doing like a kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
What we're doing is we're talking about a movie that stopped production for a while there in 1982. So it started in like 1980, 81. And then it doesn't get finished until like 1987. Can you talk a little bit about what the heck's going on here?
People started getting cold feet about just how many risks this was taking. Apparently, people really didn't like the brief bit of the film that deals with the Vietnam War, because the film is divided up into the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and then today, even though it's 1987, so we don't have a whole lot of 80s left. But and in the 60s sequence, it's the same woman throughout the entire film. And let me just say, to make a long story short, in the 60s, it shows this hippie guy getting drafted. And he's terrified of the prospect of getting drafted. So, like, right off, they're immediately painting the war as a bad thing because it's from the POV of someone who is a hippie and desperately does not want to go to war. So it's only the 80s. So this is going to make some people upset. And Hanna-Barbera is not a company that makes people upset. So he's terrified. This guy literally starts seeing death and war imagery everywhere he looks, like in old cartoons when people are hungry, so they think other people look like food. No, this guy just sees like death and skulls everywhere because he keeps thinking about how he's going to get killed in Vietnam. So not really what you would expect from, let's see who the swamp monster really is. Go yoinks. And
there's a shot that I saw from that where he's essentially I don't know if he's dead and he comes back or if he's seeing this thing, but it looks like the Vietnam skeleton monster from the original House. So it's just like this decomposing body with the skull sticking out, dressed in.
He opens the door. He opens the door, and the skull wearing an army uniform is there, telling him that like it's time to ship off to Vietnam. And there's no dialogue in the entire film, like Fantasia, which again just makes everything weirder. And then he's there, and the war is just like unambiguously portrayed as a horrible thing. And again, I have to give Hanna-Barbera some credit for having a point of view and sticking to it. And then there's like this weird apocalypse beast monster that you see in this sequence. And I think they were afraid of this sequence. They were afraid of releasing it with this sequence for a number of reasons. Number one, you can't really take it out of the movie. You can't talk about the 60s and what that meant to people and not mention the Vietnam War at all. That would just sort of be strange. Now I sound like the people who are angry turning red wasn't about 9/11. But yeah, and they didn't, I think people maybe didn't like that the cartoon was maybe trying to get political. I think people really didn't like the very macabre imagery that is about death, that is about real events that occurred, portrayed in such a pull no punches way. I mean, you've seen that skeleton thing. It's scary.
It's certainly not what it's not what you're expecting when you're dealing with a cartoon. That's not, I mean, if you're looking at Ralph Bakshi, there's a certain style that there is that you associate with Bakshi. And when you see that, you go, okay, it's going to get a little outre here. There's probably going to be some blood. There's going to be some boobs. Something like that's going to happen. You expect that. If you see something that is R. Crumb motivated, you go, okay, I know where this is going to have a certain. But when you're seeing what you're used to seeing, a style that is Yogi Bear, stuff like that, you do not expect in the middle of a Yogi Bear cartoon for there to be a undead soldier and flames and explosions happening. It kind of was like, I was going, wow, this is super ass wrongheaded. I don't even know what they were thinking of. It's like, that's not your business, man. It's the clown who laughs or whatever that Jerry Lewis movie that nobody's ever seen.
Oh my God, The Day the Clown Cried. Exactly. Yeah. It's that's a good comparison because it's just, like people need to be more aware of what happened during the Holocaust. Like, yeah, they really do. So let's have Jerry Lewis educate everyone. Wait, what? What was that? My God, who's and and I think that was the problem with Rock Odyssey. I think Hanna-Barbera was also getting cold feet because this is going to reflect really badly on them because this was going to be a TV special. They were going to show this on network TV in 1982, and that would be a bit like all that explosions and death. That was going to be a bit much. I mean, they'd allow that for the day after, but not for a Hanna-Barbera cartoon.
Right, and I think there's even weirdness. Like they had no clue what they had. There's this weird thing that they decide to put in because, of course, nobody worked on it. It was not completed. They kiboshed it in 82. And then in 87, they said, let's give it a shot. So an entire generation has gone by of rock and roll by the time they decide. So they're like, what do we do? Well, let's just steal Wham's Wake Me Up Before You Go Go and make it Yogi and Boo Boo. Like, I don't know what the hell that was supposed to be, but they're like laying in bed and like pulling each other's eyelids open.
It's very strange. This is in the later half of the movie, which is supposed to be quote unquote today. So it's the 80s, but it's 5 years later than they thought the movie was going to come out. So this seems very shoehorned in. The woman character just kind of presses a button on a computer, and then this film, it's literally old clips. They didn't do any new animation for the Wake Me Up Before You Go Go sequence. It's old clips of the Flintstones and Yogi Bear, and I think a couple of other cartoons, but those are the main ones that I remember from that scene as I'm talking to you now. And just to give you an idea, unlike Fantasia, this film has a very loose plot, but you can see that the film was started and then abandoned for a while because The plot doesn't, there's not a lot of payoff. It seems to meander around and they seem to forget it's happening for a while, but it's a woman. It's the same woman in every arc, every chapter, every arc, every decade of the film. Her name is Laura. She has blonde hair and she's searching for her true love. So the different men that she meets, they're supposed to embody whatever decade that is. Like it's the 50s, so she falls in love with some guy who's kind of like John Travolta's character in Grace. It's the 60s, so it's a different guy who's a hippie, and then she's
John
like
Travolta in Grease, which was the 70s pretending to be the 50s.
Yeah, it's honestly a lot of this film really feels like the whole nostalgia goggles phenomenon. It feels not like the 50s, but a 70s, 80s view of the 50s and so on. The movie, like it's like you said, the movie was going to end up like looking up its own ass by the time it was over because it's a very dated view of things because the company was already 2 decades behind, like I was saying.
Right. So you have a really interesting way of doing the write-ups of your movies in your zine. So there's a setup. The first is there a plot? Is there anyone I might know? Where do I find it? And what else should I know? So is there a plot? You've kind of told us, yeah, we have this woman who's dancing her way through the generations of rock and roll. Anyone you might know?
Yes, Scatman Crothers is the narrator. For all you Stephen King fans, we've got Mr. Halloran himself, Scatman Crothers, narrating the film. I guess, somebody had to explain what the hell was going on. Poor Mr. Crothers. Yeah, he's a talking jukebox.
Yeah. It looks really good too. I mean, I'm glad it said, I'm a jukebox. Jukebox actually said, I'm a jukebox.
The design is a little bit wonky because his mouth is in the front and then the part where you listen, where the sound comes out is like his eyes. So it's an unfortunate design. And then, he starts talking and like, oh, it's Scatman Crothers. Maybe everything will be okay. No, it won't. And
so where do you find it?
Okay, well, it's my good pal Mr. Lobo showed this film recently on a live stream he was doing, which I thought was really funny because I found out about that after the fact. I said, you should have asked me. For a while you could see it on the Internet Archive, but I think it was taken down, but now it's back up. There's no legal way to buy or watch the film. And there were a lot of low quality dubs out there, so beware of those. But it's on the Lost Media Wiki and it's on archive.org. So watch it while you can because there's so much licensed music in this. It might get taken down. So act quickly.
So anyway, we're going to move on here to another of the movies that you brought up in your zine, a German-French-American co-production.
Oh my God, this movie.
That has someone in it now whose star has ascended again. And it's Mean Parents Suck. So tell us a little bit about that. Is there a plot?
Oh boy, you would not believe me if I told you. But here goes. Nothing. This film is like a pet subject of mine, by the way. So there's a small town and the local school teacher is starting to notice that a lot of the children in her class are being abused or mistreated by their parents. So she stages a series of murders that to look like accidents in order to free these children and kind of be their guardian angel and free them from their mean parents. And a detective ends up investigating these quote unquote accidental deaths and notices they look way too much like murder. But then he falls in love with the teacher and he finds out she's the one who did it. What's he gonna do? Is he gonna turn her in? Is he gonna say it's okay that a few abusive parents had to die for the greater good? Yeah, this movie's a dark comedy. You watch the trailer, it looks like a 90s sitcom. Again, I think we should call this the Day the Clown Cried rule, because it's like, oh, it's a film about a school teacher that kills abusive parents and she thinks she's doing a good thing. Like, wow, that sounds like a really scary movie. It sounds like a psychological thriller of some kind, like something Alfred Hitchcock would have made. Yeah, this is a comedy. Wait, what? It's like the approach is completely out of left field. It's just, huh? Did you see
Right.
the trailer for this, Scott?
Yes, I did. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. It's three different nations. It took three
Yeah,
nations to bring this together.
the film's so insane, one continent couldn't contain its insanity.
I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I saw Death by Lollipop.
Death by Lollipop. Somebody falls in a cake. Someone falls in a cake.
At one point, I think one of the great lines of dialogue that I heard was something like, no one's going to think that a kid took a 250-pound professional wrestler and drowned him in a cake.
That's some amazing dialogue. Wow.
I'm like, okay, you don't get that every day. So yeah, the funny thing is that this is also a comedy, maybe a little tone deaf for 1991. And let's see, anyone that we would know in this movie.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's everyone's favorite 80s bully, William Zabka, who is currently reprising his most famous role on the Netflix series Cobra Kai. That is how I found out about this movie, because I'm a fan of Cobra Kai. I got into it during lockdown, but
Yeah.
So yeah, he's definitely the actor that you would have heard of in this film, along with Charlene Tilton from Dallas and the infamous Who Shot Charles Rocket episode of SNL that got him fired from the show.
Right. Yeah.
And 90s
first
kids
F-bomb.
The first F-bomb on SNL, like probably one of the most infamous bloopers in the show's history. And 90s kids will also recognize the actor playing one of the kids, Cortland Mead, who was in Recess, a very iconic 90s cartoon that I grew up with and loved. And those are the actors that American audiences would really know. It's a pretty short list. I was in the Cobra Kai fandom. I think I mentioned I did a fandom zine for them, and I made a friend. I made very good friends with somebody who was in a Discord community for the show. There's also a Lost Media Discord. Discord is huge in Lost Media matters. So I said to her, I really want to see this movie. Does anybody in your community, do they have a copy? And she said, someone in the community was able to contact the director, but he says he doesn't have enough money to finish editing the film to really get like a clean copy to show people. And then he is not sure how he would be financially able to distribute the film because it would already take a lot of money to finish what he has. But I know for a fact that the film did air in its entirety on German television, but that was a German dub of the film. So even if we can find that, most of the actors were American and they spoke English. And
right.
I think with the actors that are known, people would like to hear their real voices. I know I would. I mean, William Zabka is the one who delivers that line about the cake in the trailer. And let me tell you, that is, he delivered that line with the intensity of like, I'm playing Hamlet. I'm Hamlet now. And the cake is the skull that I hold.
So for anyone who's out there listening to this, what is your Instagram? Or where can people write you if they come up with leads? Because I think this episode is probably going to have people bring up things that have been on their minds, as well as they may be able to help you on the search and some of this stuff.
Oh, that would be great, because I would love a copy of Me and Parents Suck, but what I would love even more than that is to hear from all of you. I want to hear about the movies that you would like to see featured in another zine. You'll get credit, obviously. I want to hear about your quests, your stories, your particular bugbears that you want to find. Send them to me. I'm on Instagram at basement_mind, MIND_meds, MEDS, Basement Mind Medicine Productions. That's me, Roxanne.
All right. So, okay, you're not getting off that easy. We're going to talk about Home Sweet Kolob. I'm going to talk about Plan 10 from outer space. Everybody knows Plan 9, but do you know the Salt Lake City version, Plan 10 from outer space? So what should people know?
First of all, this is a sci-fi musical about Mormons. And as I say in the zine, it is the best Mormon-themed musical that you'll ever see. that was not created by Trey Parker and Matt Stone. That's an overly narrow superlative, but here we go. And yeah, this film was the brainchild of a real cult and outsider auteur, Trent Harris. He made a movie that some of you may have heard of called Ruben and Ed, which starred Crispin Glover and Howard Hessman, and that's a movie I really enjoy, and I really wanted to know more about this filmmaker's work. And I think the first time, the VHS Preservation Society is a group I always see at horror conventions, and they were the ones who turned me on to this film because they were distributing it because it was so hard to find. They helped this film get a lot of exposure. That's where I first saw it, because I was at a convention and I noticed, who wouldn't notice something that says Plan 10 from Outer Space? Because I love bad movies, and I was like, okay, what is this? And I'm reading it and I said, wait, this is a religious film? Like, I have to see this. And I got a copy from them, but there is only one way you can, oh, well, I'll get to that later. I got a copy from them, and I watched the film, and I instantly was really struck by it. It almost feels like someone got a hold of a script Wes Anderson was going to make, and and Trent Harris made it instead. It's quirky, but it's not twee. It's not trying overly hard, which is what interested me about it. And it goes into, it's very sincere, but it's also very parts of it are also very tongue in cheek at the same time. And it is a musical, and it basically says that the explanation for the Mormon faith is aliens and bees, alien
and bees. Yes. And so a character that's walking around that's a one-eyed beehive has a head that's a beehive. I was like,
it's a helmet. It's a space helmet. Yeah.
And then what I got to see online was elaborate dance numbers, these insanely precise things where they do a little finger waggle, and I don't even get what they were doing, but I'm assuming you probably do this in your sleep, this dance. I was like going, this is insane. There's like 50 things going on at the same time. The music's barely keeping up. And then in comes Karen Black singing like she has an opera voice. And I'm like, I don't know what the hell is going on in this movie.
Karen Black's, the dance scene is vital to the plot. And Karen Black's scene is a dream sequence that also ends up being absolutely essential to the plot. But that's really her singing. Karen Black was almost a Broadway star, but her voice just couldn't make it past the footlights. She was going to play the lead in Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, but then became famous as a film actress. But she's showing off her very quirky, almost opera-style voice there. And the song that they're doing, which is called Nahor's Song, that's the name of Black's character, Nahor's Song in the film, but is also called If You Could Hide a Kolob, which is called, that's the same title as a traditional Mormon hymn. And like Kolob is like a heavenly region in the Mormon faith. And I want to say, people have described it as Rocky Horror meets the Mormons, I believe is a quote on the DVD box. There's something Lynchian about it, if that makes any sense. There's this kind of heightened reality that's occurring, but it's also a portrait of small town life, and like all that feels very Lynchian to me. But at the end of the day, it's a Trent Harris joint, and there is only one way to get an official copy of this film because it's not streaming anywhere. You got to go to Trent Harris's website and get a copy yourself. You can buy it there. He will autograph it for you. He's a very nice gentleman.
TrentHarris.com, right?
TrentHarris.com. You can order it there, and every DVD you buy from him, he will sign for you.
So I'm looking at this. The sci-fi religious deconstruction surreal comedy musical is many things, but mostly a satire of Mormonism. So is Trent Harris a Mormon, or is he one of the few non-Mormons in Utah that said, God damn it, I'm going to make a funny movie about this?
To my knowledge, Mr. Harris has never been a practicing Mormon, but he lives in Utah, and the films of his that I've seen really embrace the location of Utah and the kind of unique landscapes that you get there. because there's a lot of desert stuff in Reuben and Ed. And I went to Utah when I was a very young child, like 9. And the landscape out there has always stayed with me. And I think he uses that to really interesting effect in all his films, because it really does sort of feel like a dreamscape when you're actually seeing it.
Oh my God, yeah. When I drove cross country to get to California from Pennsylvania to San Francisco, many, many years ago in the 90s, early 90s. And we drove through Salt Lake, right by the Great Salt Lake. In fact, right by where Carnival of Souls was shot, that big temple that was there.
I love the Salt Air Pavilion. I love Carnival of Souls. Yeah.
Salt Air Pavilion. And we went there. And I said, I've got to stop. I've got to take a look at this place. And they had tried to make, it's surreal already. The place looks insane. And then they tried to make like a park kind of thing around it, but something a little bit less theme parky and more like a bazaar or a carnival. And they had bumper boats there. The problem was the smell of the Great Salt Lake is not great, and it draws flies. So we go over by this. It just happened to be one of those days that you don't put in the postcards, but the entire bumper boat area was covered with a sheen of flies. And I was like, who's going to get on this? And they'll be swatting and splashing each other with flies. And I was like, this has to be the most surreal thing I've ever seen. So, but anyway, I digress. Too much about Utah, too much about the Great Salt Lakes. But it is kind of stunning to me that there's a movie like that. Now, we've talked a bit about these areas of the internet that are perfect for finding lost media, that this is a huge deal for people. So you mentioned that there was a holy grail of lost media, and you talked a little bit about Sesame Street having the Wicked Witch of the West on there. What is there in the horror industry that are holy grails that you've come across in this deep web?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, so obviously most people would say the horror holy grail of all time is London After Midnight. But Last House on Dead End Street was a holy grail for a lot of people. So I love your association with that. One thing that a lot of your younger viewers will probably be eagerly anticipating is the lost anime movie for the anime JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Phantom Blood. There's a lot of horror tropes, horror imagery in that anime. I'm not super familiar with the anime. I've only seen like the first 5 episodes. And I did some research on Phantom Blood in case I want to include it in my next zine, but which I probably will. But a lot of people really want to see Phantom Blood because the anime is so popular now, but this predates that. It was a separate movie that is an early arc of the overarching story that's meant to stand on its own. And it's got this kind of Jack the Ripper Gaslight meets anime aesthetic happening, with this mysterious mask that has occult powers and, practically disembowels people when it fits onto their faces. It's good stuff. It's very exciting. I can see why there's so much anticipation for this one. Another horror holy grail that I know a lot of people would love to see, but it's been so long, who knows if we'll ever find any trace of it, was the deleted scenes for the movie Freaks.
Right.
Todd Browning, yeah, because originally we were going to get a little more of the ultimate fate of the villains. We see Cleopatra as the feathered hen, but we were also going to see the strongman Hercules singing soprano, implying that he had been castrated. But that was just too much for the 1930s.
Well, obviously, it was less than too much, because the too much, what we saw was too much for that time period. It's completely obliterated Browning's.
Sad. I mean, these people, this was how they earned their living. These were their lives. They were up there. They're just doing I don't really see the film as. To me, The Greatest Showman was a much more exploitative film than Freaks, but these people, they were just doing the best they could. This was their living. Yeah. But again, I might be digressing a little bit here.
But it's hard to say in that spot, because I will say for the most part, I mean, Browning grew up in that, right?
He
He
did.
came from that family, so his view on it is probably less jaundiced than ours, or he sees it much more commonplace. I do know that there were ugly laws in the United States at that time, so the very idea that you could be deformed could keep you off the streets in certain cities. So
That's so awful. My
yeah,
God.
it's friggin' crazy, but it's true. That's what we had in this country. We had it all over the world, but in this country. And the idea that the movie does do a very good job of humanizing the
Yes.
freaks that are in it. But in the end, when you see the worm guy with a knife in his teeth crawling through the rain and mud and the lightning's going off, you go, okay, I can see why someone might say
I do.
he's kind of dancing on the side there. But I mean, that's part of cinema, right? And I get that. But I have to acknowledge when people sit there and they say, well, do you really think it was exploitive? For the most part, no. But he knew what he was getting into. I think
I would agree with that assessment. In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. But it's just I know people would really like to see the discarded footage from that. People are really curious about that. And because it was such an experimental film for that time.
Movies that get anywhere near that still have a lot of problems.
Yes, I think that's very true. And that concept is pretty fascinating to me because it's like you said, some people say there are very few taboos left in the world, but people don't seem to want to talk about the fact that people who don't fit what the popular definition of normal is, people who have some sort of people who are neurodivergent in some way or have a physical disability of some kind or some combination thereof. People don't want to talk about how they're not treated fairly.
Yeah. So you have another zine that's coming up. You had mentioned to me that there might be a shot on video horror movie that's going to be involved in it. Now, I've just gone on a full crazy, I don't know what you want to call it, a quest. I guess I've been ill. And so I watched, I don't know how, a SCAD, to say the least, of shot on video. And people have been reaching out. Obviously, this has gotten a lot of heat behind it because people are letting me know that they're big fans as well. And I did not expect that. So you have an SOV that is super rare. Let's hear about it.
It's super rare. And the only place to watch it right now is on YouTube. This film is called Nighty Night and is also known as Midnight Nightmares. The director's name, I hope I'm saying this correctly, the director and writer, his name is Hirohisa Hokusho, and the film came out in 1986. It was only released on VHS in Japan, and it is shot on video, and for a long time, the only way to watch it was to get a very rare VHS copy of the film. It had never been it's never been officially translated into English. You can watch it on YouTube, but the subtitles were made by a fan.
Okay.
And the person who uploaded it. But it's an anthology J-horror film, and I like Japanese horror a lot. I'm a big fan of the artist and writer Junji Ito.
Yes,
and
Ito's great.
I think Ito is a master. I think that's what they were going for with this film. Nighty Night is, not necessarily Ito himself. I don't know where his work was at in 1986. I don't know. He certainly wasn't a household name he is now. But that kind of body horror and sense of unease that is peculiar to Ito's work is what I think they were going for here. And I think there's really only one segment that hits the mark because this is an anthology, but it's just they were clearly working with a limited budget and limited resources. And like you were saying in your episode about shot on video films, which was great, by the way, it's just interesting to see what these people can do with the time and the resources that they have. The film is a little murky and difficult to make out, but there's definitely images that will stick with you. I love the monster in the segment where this young woman is playing a video game that comes to life, and then the TV says, "The monster is in your house. You must defeat the monster." And she turns around, and then there's this thing that looks like if you asked Hieronymus Botch to design a Pokemon and and then they sold it at Spirit Halloween. It's like this grotesque kind of humanoid head on like a cockroach body, and it's scuttling around the apartment. The ending is very anticlimactic, but I'm like, oh, I like that monster. He's fun. There's also some really good body horror in the segment called Cinderella, about a girl who really wants to be beautiful for the guy she likes. So she gets some facial surgery that is rather extreme. I don't want to spoil any more for our listeners, but I'd like to write a little bit about that film in my next segment. And my, the zine got a good response, so I'm really looking forward to doing the next one, and that one's going to be featured.
Oh, fantastic. So I think we're at a point now where we can do a little bit of a lightning round. I'm bringing a hard to find movie that I was able to find through a friend of a friend of a friend.
Nice.
And we'll see if you know anything. Yeah, it's one of those things. Have you ever seen the only movie that was produced and directed by Darren McGavin, Kolchak himself?
Oh, no, I haven't. No, what's this called?
Okay. Well, I knew it by the name Run Stranger Run, but its real name is, I don't know, Happy Mother's Day, Love George from 1973.
Oh, okay. I don't know this one. What is the premise of this?
This has Patricia Neal in it, Cloris Leachman, Bobby Darin, Ron Howard. All
this
these
is
people.
A stacked cast.
It's an insane cast. 2 Academy Award winners inside of this thing, and nobody's fucking seen it except for me and a few others who are unlucky enough to have known me and had to hear me talk about this. So the movie is about Ron Howard coming to town. He's a wayward youth, and he's in a Nova Scotia town, and he's come to get his past back. He's been sent away, and he comes back to where he believes his mother was, and he's trying to find his identity there. But at the same point, there are all these weird murders that are happening. And so by the end of the movie, all of this is going to make sense, but maybe it doesn't. I'm not going to tell you, but let's just say there's some really interesting things that happen inside of this movie. So small town, it's supposed to be New England. It's actually Nova Scotia, wrong country. Sorry. But there is this really weird thing that happens in this movie that made me have to search for it. I saw it in the early days of home box offices, Run Stranger Run. And it then disappeared quickly. This is back when home box office was only on maybe 10 hours a day, 8 hours a day, and the rest of it was just
only
ads.
10 hours a day.
Yeah, something like that. And the rest of it was a crawl that would show you. They had the schedule would play. But anyway, Run Stranger Run came on. It was 1973. It was one of the movies that they could afford, I guess, for HBO. And it played quite a few times. And the things that I remembered was that there was a kid digging in the sand, making sand castles on the beach. And it digs a little bit deep with the shovel, and there's a skull there. And
oh my God, that would definitely stick with you.
Yeah, and the kid gets this weird look on her face, and she starts to just shovel the sand back over. Like, let's not tell anybody about this.
Oh, I love that. That's not how I was thinking that was going to go at all. Yeah, I love that that's where they went with it.
That's about as New England as you're going to get to. But the reason that I remembered this movie is that I think, and I may be wrong, if anybody knows out there, the first movie where someone walks into a house and it's the shock, where they walk in, they find the dead bodies in room after room after room of the killer. And then the killer's in the house. So there's this scene where this woman goes into this rickety old house and there's like mattresses on the staircase and stuff. She goes in after, I guess, her boyfriend, and she walks upstairs and she opens up a door and boom, there's her boyfriend with hatchet marks in his throat and he's squirting blood. And I believe he's castrated because there's just this big splash of blood between his legs.
Oh my God.
And she screams, she rolls backwards, And then she opens up the bathroom door and there's a dead body that's been there for who knows how long in the bathtub, like splashed. And there's another body laying over here and she screams. Then she kicks open a door and there's the killer with a fucking hatchet covered in blood. And she runs and she tries to get away and she falls out. I don't know how this happens. She falls out the window on the second floor.
Oh my God.
And goes face first right into a mirror that's just sitting there on the because who doesn't have a mirror on their front porch?
I was gonna say, don't you hate it when that happens?
Yeah. So it's just one of those things. It was the first time that I remember seeing a movie where someone walks into a house and it's the reveal after reveal after reveal, which of course becomes very famous after Halloween does it. But this was 1973, and I don't know if I've ever seen it before that. And I think that might be the one really weak claim to fame that Happy Mother's Day Love George has. But if you're a completist and you're a collector, you might want to see this movie because he also does Darren McGavin. First off, Darren needed an editor. He didn't know it, but he really needed an editor. This movie didn't have to be as long as it is, but it's the last appearance of Bobby Darin. He dies like a couple months later. So this is like the last.
Yeah, he died young. He was only 37 when he died, I think.
Yeah. So he's in there. Simon Oakland is in it. So he's like giving his friends from the Kolchak a thing. And even Darren McGavin himself makes a cameo as a lost father sailor in a photo. It will make you laugh out loud when you see it. You go, oh my God, Darren, that's fucking hilarious. But anyway, that's my little nugget that I'm bringing to this thing. Do you have anything that you'd like to bring?
Well, we already talked about some of my favorites. I know there's a really hard to find movie that you're really fond of that I am too, which is Twice Upon a Time.
Yeah.
Twice Upon a Time, this is definitely something that I saw an ad for this movie. They showed it on Disney Channel when I was about 9 years old. And I remember thinking, like, what is this? And like, getting like a little bit of uncanny valley. Because, again, there were like these swooping vultures in the trailer, and I was getting a little bit of uncanny valley from that. And I remember they were talking about like, a world of nightmares. And I was like, I don't want to watch that. But then I found out that the movie that I saw that scared me was called Twice Upon a Time, and it was produced by Lucasfilm, which is, I think, this movie's main claim to fame, which was when Lucasfilm, like our friends at Hanna-Barbera, decided to go off and do something, shall we say, a little bit different. And there really is no feature film that is quite like Twice Upon a Time. A lot of people grew up with this movie kind of the way I did by seeing it on cable, but a lot of people saw it on HBO, I think is the main way people saw it, or I believe Showtime. Oh, okay. So it's currently not streaming anywhere, which is interesting, but you can still buy it on DVD from Amazon, because the Warner Archive makes it. They print them on demand, and that's where I got my copy. I don't think it's ever been released on Blu-ray. So let me go into a little bit about what the movie is actually about, because I realize I haven't done that. Because if you haven't ever seen this movie, it's going to sound like I'm on drugs. I assure you, I'm not. As far as I know, Twice Upon a Time is one of the only films, other than some really early animated films that were done in silhouette, like The Adventures of Prince Ahmed, that was done in cutout animation. So it's not just stop motion, it's cutouts. And it was directed by a man named John Cordy, who had done a lot of animation for Sesame Street. And he came up with his own process of cutout animation called lumage, where these like kind of see-through, these plastic pieces that were colored and a little bit see-through were put in front of a lighted board. And it gives the film a very unique look. It looks almost like a Rankin Bass cartoon animated in cutout animation, because the characters have like a very cute, quirky look to them. It looks kind of like a kid's storybook come to life. They're very stylized. And the entire film seems to take place in some sort of alternate reality where the human world is called Din, and mortal people rush around. So they're called the Rushers of Din, and like the real world is live action and it's filmed in black and white, and then the world of Good Dreams and the world of Bad Dreams are done in animation. There's not a ton of live action in the film, but it all manages to look very uncanny, I guess you'd say. And the good guys are some misfits from the land of good dreams that want to deliver good dreams to sleeping people. But the bad guys from the Mercworks, the land of nightmares, want to release some kind of dream bombs that are going to go off in the real world and make people have nightmares forever. So it's up to the good guys, a little shapeshifter named Ralph and his friend Mumford, who appears to be some version of Charlie Chaplin, to stop him. And the great thing about this movie is if you buy the DVD from Warner Archive, there are two cuts of the film. There's because a lot of the dialogue was ad-libbed. They got a lot of improv comedians to be in this film. And there's a version that has some would say gratuitous, a lot of gratuitous swearing. Supposedly, the movie they wanted to make a kind of a slightly edgier than Disney film, and it's not long into the uncensored cut of the film that the bad guy yells the words "tough shit." So supposedly, a lot of angry parents took their children out of the screening when the film was first released, when the bad language started, and when it pops up, it's pretty filthy. It's like not every animated film that seems like it's somewhat aimed at kids, where characters just go asshole, at the end of a scene. But that's this movie. There's also a clean cut for those of you who don't want to expose people to that. So
context is everything. That's what that shows.
Exactly.
So, I mean, we could go on forever and ever. And there's a lot of stuff to be talked about. People like myself, people like you, people like most of the people who listen to this show, we're collectors. Mm-hmm. Part of the fun is not only watching these things, but being able to share them. So I have this, my own holy grail. I've not been able to find this. I've stumped everybody who's a collector that I know. I know it exists, but it's hard to find. So it was somewhere in the 80s. I'll say it was a mid-80s production, Canadian. I found it in a mom and pop store. Like, I've never seen it in another store, but it's a mom and pop store in New Hampshire. And it's a science fiction film. It's not particularly great. It's a science fiction film that's taking place in our time, it seems, just a few years later, where they are able to take the essence of someone, their memories and everything, and put them in a new body. It's instead of there being a prison system, it's the idea that good people shouldn't have to die because of old age if they've done really great things, and bad people shouldn't be allowed to get around doing that kind of thing. So instead of just executing them and having that perfectly good body interned in some way, we're going to put the mind and the spirit and the memories of the elderly good person into the young body so they can continue on. So what we do is we follow two parallel stories. First story is of a young man who finds out that his wife is having an affair with the garage mechanic, who's also his friend, and he creates a crime of passion. He beats this guy up and he hangs him off of the lift that you have the cars on. He doesn't hang him, but he has him by his neck, tied with a belt, and he does something unmentionable. He essentially takes a screwdriver or something and sodomizes him at that moment with it. So he drops the thing, and the guy's standing there pretty much held up by his neck, unconscious. And the guy leaves the garage. And as he leaves the garage, he slams the door, and some piece of equipment lands on the jack, that the hydraulic system, and the lift rises up and hangs the guy. So it is a crime of passion, and he hangs the guy. And at the same time, we're watching another guy who is considered a stand-up person in the community. He's elderly. He's not taking care of his body, so it's giving out on him. His kids all hate him, though. But he is rich. He has been a member of the community in a way that he's given donations to people. He's been good with the people in the government. And so he is up for a new body. So we see these two parallel lives. A guy who's really just young and doesn't have a lot of money and makes one big fucking mistake, but it's a crime of passion. And then we see an old guy who's made all the money in the world being a terrible person, but everybody thinks he's okay because he's given the right things to the right people, but his family doesn't want to know anything about him. And then we see this operation, quote unquote, operation happen. And so the young man is gone, right? He's put into the dead body of this old guy, sentenced to death. And the young man now has this old guy inside of him. So he has a new lease on life. But his family doesn't want to have anything to do with him. And he goes out to have this new life, but he realizes he doesn't like young people. He's still an old man at heart. His friends are dying off.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't really connect with anyone at all. And at the end of the movie, he takes he's underneath a overpass, a freeway overpass, and he spray paints his name, whatever the name was, lives. And he just sits there defiantly, like, I'm going to outlive everybody anyway. And it ends with this really sad feeling of be careful of what you look for, or be careful what you wish for. And the end of the movie, it was so low budget. They basically just had all of the credits on like an Apple IIe or something like that on graphics. And they just hit go. And all the green text starts going up on the screen, and it's all. And so I have no idea what the name of this movie is, and everybody always thinks that it's the movie
Seconds with Rock Hudson.
No, that's a better one. Seconds, yeah, Seconds is a good guess. The other one is the Mine Hunters or something like that with Christopher Walken. No, it's not.
Oh, I actually don't know that one. But when you started telling me about the plot, I said, this sounds like the movie Seconds, especially because it's like, he realizes he doesn't get along that well with young people because he's still an old man. I'm like, that sounds a lot like the movie Seconds, but it's clearly not that movie.
Yeah.
It was a more recent film than that, and you'd know. There's a lot of recognizable actors in that, you'd know. And
I love Seconds. I mean, that's a great one. I mean, in that movie, they start on the premise that so many men go missing, like they commit suicide, they just leave their families at a certain age.
I don't know this movie. While you were talking, I tried to use my Google Foo to look up body swap movies, and I can't find anything. It sounds like it might have been an independent Canadian film.
Yeah.
They definitely didn't have two pennies to rub together, if that's what the end credits looked like.
Yeah. Oh, no, they didn't have a lot of money, but it so impressed me. So all of that great stuff in this one movie that I may never find out. But if anybody is out there listening who knows this movie or has a clue, let me know. I'm going to have to try and drop that one in the Lost Films archive or wiki and see where that goes. So we're at the end. We could go on forever, but Roxanne, it's time to go. So tell people where they can find you.
I'm on Instagram at basement_mind_meds_ basement mind medicine. Basement Mind Medicine Productions. That's me.
All right. And how do they get a copy of your zine?
You can DM me on Instagram and you can order me a copy. You can order a copy from me. I have Venmo and PayPal. It's only $5. And you can also watch me on Cinema Insomnia with Mr. Lobo. Some of our more recent episodes include The Ghastly Love of Johnny X and The Visitants. So head over to cinemainsomnia.com. Good times. And I'll have another zine coming out if any of you are in the New York City area. My zine is also on sale at Forbidden Planet, the comic book shop. So that's pretty cool. And I'll have Craziest Movies You Never Saw Part 2 coming out sometime in early 2024.
All right. Well, thanks again, Roxanne, for coming on our show. And I thank everybody who's been out there listening. And for those that are out there, and it is that holiday season, stay safe, but also stay hellbent. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.